The pipe was leaking again. Darius Cole pressed his back against the curved wall of the lower corridor, flashlight in his teeth, both hands working a wrench around a fitting that had been stripped twice already this month. The station hummed around him, a deep, bone-level vibration that never stopped, the sound of 17,000 beings going about their lives 6 floors above his head. Down here there was only the hum, and the dripping, and the cold. Outpost Veron 7 was the kind of place that existed because it had to. Neutral ground, a waypoint between 3 territorial zones where humans, dragons, and a dozen smaller species could trade, refuel, and mostly avoid killing each other. It was not glamorous. It was not comfortable. But it was steady work, and Darius had learned long ago that steady work was worth more than exciting work. He got the fitting sealed, wiped his hands on his knee, checked his tablet 2 more stops before he could sleep. He was moving toward Junction 9 when he heard it. At first he thought it was a pressure leak. A thin, high sound, almost musical, threading through the wall to his left. He stopped walking and stood very still, the way his father had taught him to listen in the woods back home, not straining, just open. It came again, not mechanical, not air. Something alive was crying. Darius was not a man who overthought things. He turned left. The sound led him down a maintenance branch that dead-ended at a sealed cargo bay. The bay itself was locked, but beside it was a collapsed storage alcove, old shelving units that had buckled inward, probably during a docking shunt weeks ago that nobody in the lower decks had bothered to file a report about. The gap between the shelving and the wall was narrow and dark. He crouched down and aimed his flashlight into the gap. 2 amber eyes looked back at him. Darius held very still. The hatchling was small, smaller than he expected, smaller than any dragon he had seen in the upper station, even the young ones that the diplomatic staff sometimes brought through on formal visits. She was curled tight on herself, one wing folded wrong, the membrane along it torn near the base. Her scales were a deep slate color, and they were dull in a way that scales were not supposed to be dull. She was cold. She had been here for a while. She made the sound again, that thin, high keening, and Darius felt it in his chest like a struck bell. He did not call security. He did not reach for his comm. He sat down on the floor of the maintenance corridor, cross-legged, back against the opposite wall, and turned his flashlight to face the ceiling so the light diffused and softened. Then he waited. 3 minutes passed. The hatchling's crying slowed. He started talking. Nothing specific, just low, steady words. He told her about the pipe he had just fixed. He told her the fitting had been badly installed to begin with, and it was not her fault, which did not make sense, but the tone was what mattered. He talked the way he used to talk to the stray dogs that came to his mother's back porch, like the words were just sound, and the sound meant, "I am not here to hurt you." The hatchling moved, just slightly. One small, clawed foot shifted forward. Darius did not move. Another minute. Then she crept out from the gap in the shelving slowly, dragging the hurt wing, and stopped 2 feet from his knee. She was looking at him with those amber eyes, and there was something in them beyond animal fear, something that was thinking, evaluating. He held out his hand, palm up, the way you would for a dog or a bird. She looked at it for a long time. Then she stepped onto his palm. She weighed almost nothing. He could feel the tremble in her, the deep cold that had settled into her small body. He moved slowly, using his free hand to unzip his thermal work jacket, the heavy one, insulated for the sub-level corridors, and he wrapped her inside it with just her head visible, tucked against his chest. She went rigid for a moment. Then something in her released, and she pressed into the warmth. The crying stopped. Darius sat there in the corridor for a moment longer, thinking. He should report this. There were procedures. The dragon staff in the upper station had a welfare office. He had seen the signs near the diplomatic bay. He should call it in. He thought about how long she had been down here alone, in the cold, with a torn wing, with no one coming. He picked up his toolkit with his free hand, tucked the hatchling more firmly against his chest, and stood up. He did not call it in. He carried her through the lower corridors, the ones with no active cameras after the third shift ended, and up the maintenance stairs to crew level 4. His quarters were small, one bunk, one chair, one viewport the size of a dinner plate. It was warm. He set her down on the bunk, still wrapped in the jacket. She looked up at him. "You're okay now," he said. She did not understand the words, but she stopped shaking. The medkit was meant for humans. Darius knew that. He also knew that bones were bones and a splint was a splint, and the hatchling's wing had a clean break near the second joint that needed to be held still if it was going to heal straight. He worked slowly, checking her reaction at every step, stopping whenever she flinched. She let him. That surprised him more than anything else about her, the way she held still and watched his hands with those amber eyes, like she was deciding, every few seconds, that he was still worth trusting. He used a length of flexible wire from his toolkit and 2 strips of padding cut from his spare work gloves. The splint was not pretty, but it was firm and it did not pinch. When he finished, he sat back and she extended the wing slightly, testing it, and then folded it back against her body with something that looked almost like acceptance. "Good," Darius said. She made a low sound in response, not the crying from before, something different, shorter, softer. He fed her from his ration pack. She ate the protein strips in 3 bites each and looked at him for more, and he gave her more, and she ate until she stopped. He filled a cup from the tap and set it near her snout, and she drank most of it, then knocked the rest over and watched it spread across the bunk sheet with what Darius was fairly sure was mild interest and no remorse at all. He called her Sara. The name came to him because she kept looking at the small viewport near his bunk, pressing her nose toward the glass to look at the stars, and the word meant sky in a language his grandmother had spoken. It fit. She responded to it. Not immediately, but by the second day, when he said her name, she turned her head. Up in the station's diplomatic sector, things were quieter than they should have been. High Warden Ashvin stood at his office window, watching a cargo hauler detach from the docking arm below. He was a large dragon, slate gray, formal in bearing, precise in every movement. He had been station liaison for 6 years and had cultivated a reputation for thoroughness. The report on his desk described a missing hatchling, lost during a docking transit complication 3 days ago. The report was 4 lines long. He had written it himself. He filed it. He marked the case as unresolvable due to transit conditions. He closed the window on his screen. In the corridor outside his office, Elder Rin was passing by. Rin was old, genuinely old, the kind of age that made younger dragons unconsciously lower their voices around him. He had spent decades as a diplomatic witness, which meant he had spent decades watching people say one thing and mean another. He heard Ashvin's door click shut and he slowed his walk. 4 lines for a missing hatchling. Rin continued down the corridor, but he was thinking. Back in crew quarters 4, Darius was on his second day of covering for Sara's existence with a combination of careful scheduling and deliberate normalcy. He worked his shifts, filed his reports, ate in the crew hall. He did not tell anyone. He was not sure yet what telling anyone would accomplish, and he had learned in the maintenance decks of 3 different stations over 11 years that silence was usually safer than noise until you understood what you were dealing with. What he was dealing with was increasingly unclear. Sara was fast. Not just physically, she had started pulling herself around his quarters with impressive speed despite the splint, but mentally. He had a small comm unit on his desk that he used to listen to station broadcasts while he worked on paperwork. On the 3rd day, she climbed onto the desk, pressed her ear against the speaker, and went completely still for 40 minutes while a dragon cultural program played. She was listening, and her expression was not the expression of something hearing noise. It was the expression of something recognizing language. On the evening of the 4th day, the comm unit played a formal dragon announcement, something about a trade delegation schedule, and Sora lifted her head and made a sound that was clearly a response. Not mimicry, a response. Darius set down his stylus and looked at her for a long moment. "You understand that," he said, "not a question." She looked at him, amber eyes steady, then she looked back at the comm unit. He thought about reporting her again. He thought about the 4-line report he would never know about, filed by a warden who had moved very quickly to close a case about a missing hatchling. He thought about how long she had been in that alcove, cold and hurt and alone, with no one looking for her. He turned the comm unit up slightly. She settled on the desk beside it, wings folded, listening to every word. That night, while she slept curled against his side, Darius stared at the ceiling and had the slow, quiet thought that this was not a stray. Strays did not listen to diplomatic broadcasts with the focused attention of someone taking notes. Strays did not make deliberate sounds in response to formal language. He did not know what she was, but she was something. She hummed in her sleep, a low vibration that he could feel in his ribs, and he decided the answer could wait until morning. Her temperature spiked on the 6th morning. Darius woke to find Sora pressed against the cold metal of the viewport frame, her small body radiating heat that he could feel from across the room. She was not crying. She was not moving. She was just lying there, eyes half open, scales flickering in a way he had not seen before, a faint, uneven shimmer running from her neck down along her spine. He put his hand near her and felt the fever without touching her. The station medkit had a temperature reader. He held it close without contact. The reading was 42. He did not know what a dragon's normal range was, but he knew 42 was not good for anything biological. He had two choices. He could wait and hope, or he could get her to a scanner. He chose the scanner. The station's medical bay had two locations. The main bay on level 2 was staffed around the clock. The secondary bay on level 6, a smaller room kept for overflow and after hours, ran on automated systems after the second shift. Darius had maintenance access to almost every room in the lower and mid-station. He had repaired the secondary bay's ventilation twice in the past year. He knew the layout. He knew the camera positions. He knew that on 7th-day nights, when the skeleton crew was at its smallest, the corridor outside the secondary bay saw almost no foot traffic. It was 7th-day night. He wrapped Sora in the thermal jacket again, tucked her against his chest, and walked the long way around. The secondary bay was quiet and dim, running on overnight settings. Darius pulled up the med scanner, a wide-panel unit built for multiple species, since the station served a mixed population, and set Sora on the examination surface. She was too tired to resist, though she watched his face the whole time. He ran the scan. The results were half in a medical notation system he understood and half in biological flags he did not. He could see elevated temperature, stressed tissue around the wing joint, some dehydration. He was working out whether the scanner had a recommendation function when something else flagged. A secondary reading, subdermal. The scanner had detected a bioluminescent pattern running beneath Sora's scales from the base of her skull down the center of her spine. The scanner listed it under biological anomaly, non-pathological, unclassified. On the screen it showed as a mapped outline, a branching line with precise intervals, almost like a circuit diagram. Beautiful in a technical way. Darius looked at it, understood nothing about it, and saved the scan to his personal file. He was reaching for the fever reduction settings when he heard footsteps in the corridor. He went still. The footsteps slowed, stopped. The secondary bay had a frosted panel beside the door glass that diffused light and shapes from both directions. Darius looked at it. Sora's spine mark was glowing faintly through the thermal jacket, enough to push light through the fabric in the dark room. On the other side of the panel, a shape stood motionless. Darius killed the overhead light, moved Sora under the jacket more firmly, waited. The shape on the other side of the panel did not move for a long time. Then, slowly, it walked away. Darius exhaled. He got Sora's fever addressed. The scanner's automated system was able to dispense a general anti-inflammatory agent in a species-calibrated dose once he found the function, and he carried her back to his quarters without seeing anyone. He did not sleep well. Elder Rin also did not sleep well. He sat at his private desk in his quarters on level 3, a pot of hot grain tea untouched beside his elbow, and he looked at the screen in front of him. He had been running searches for the past hour, careful, quiet searches through records he had legitimate access to as a senior diplomatic witness. He was not looking for anything specific. He was checking a memory. The memory was of a shape he had seen through frosted glass, small, unmistakably young, and glowing with a subdermal pattern that he had seen once before in his life. Once, 40 years ago, in a formal imperial ceremony that most of the current station population had not been alive for. The mark of the imperial bloodline was not documented in public records. It was not taught in standard dragon history. It was known only to those who had stood in the inner court, and Rin had stood there once, a young diplomatic witness assigned to an event he had barely understood at the time. He understood it now. His search confirmed what he already feared. The Dragon Emperor's bloodline had been struck 6 days ago, an attack on a private transit convoy. The court had issued no public statement. There were no survivor reports. No survivor reports. Rin looked at the untouched tea, then at the confirmation on his screen, then at the ceiling. He thought about Ashvin's 4-line report. He thought about the human maintenance worker he had seen in the lower decks earlier this week, calm, unremarkable, carrying a toolkit. He thought about the shape behind the frosted glass, glowing with a mark that meant the last thread of an empire was still alive. Rin closed his screen. He sat in the dark. He did not contact Ashvin. He did not contact the court. He sat in the dark for a long time, and the tea went cold, and he thought about what kind of person sat down on a cold floor in an empty corridor because something small was crying. On the 8th day, Sora spoke to him with her eyes. Not language, not yet, but something deliberate, a focused, sustained attention that went beyond what an animal offered. When Darius came back from his shift tired and sat on the edge of the bunk without saying anything, she climbed onto his knee and looked at his face the way a person looks at another person who is carrying something heavy. Then she rested her chin on his knee and stayed. He sat there for 10 minutes before he realized he felt better. He was not sure what to do with that. The 9th day brought a different problem. Darius was working a repair in Junction 12, one of the mid-level corridors that ran between the maintenance sector and the outer diplomatic ring, when he heard footsteps he recognized before he saw who they belonged to. Elder Rin moved with a specific economy of motion, each step placed with care, unhurried in a way that was not slowness but something more like patience. Rin stopped nearby and looked at the wall panel Darius was repairing. He said it was good that the station maintained its infrastructure carefully. Darius agreed. There was a pause. Then Rin said, in the same conversational tone, that he had been thinking lately about the differences between human instinct and dragon instinct. He said that dragons, when threatened, tended to alert the group. They communicated danger outward. He said that humans, from what he had observed over many years, sometimes did the opposite. They pulled the threatened thing inward, close, and they stayed quiet until they understood the danger better. Darius kept his eyes on the wall panel. He said he supposed that was true for some people. Rin said, "If you found something small and hurt and afraid, what would you do?" Darius set down his tool. He looked at the old dragon. "Depends on what hurt it," he said, "and whether the thing that hurt it was still looking." Rin was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once with an expression Darius could not fully read. He said that was a thoughtful answer. He said he hoped Darius had a good shift. He walked away. Darius stood in the corridor for a while after that, thinking. 2 levels up. Ashvin was not thinking, he was working. He had pulled maintenance logs from the past 10 days and was cross-referencing them against camera dead zones in the lower station. He had found the gap near the cargo bay on level 1. He had found that a maintenance worker with lower deck access had been in that area on the night in question. The worker's name was Darius Cole, human, 11-year station employee, unremarkable record. Ashvin looked at the name for a long time. He did not act immediately. He was a careful person. He needed to be sure before he moved. On the 10th day, Sara did something new. Darius's comm unit was playing a standard station transmission, maintenance scheduling, when it cycled into a cross-channel broadcast, the kind that carried multiple species station programming in rotation. A segment of dragon language came through. Formal register. Some kind of ceremonial recitation, probably from a cultural program. Sora sat up straight on the desk. She listened to the whole segment. Then she turned to Darius and made a sound, not the humming, not the simple tone she used for comfort or hunger. This was structured, multi-part. It had the shape of language. Darius stared at her. She made it again, slower. And this time at the end, she added 2 syllables that she had been practicing quietly for days, sounds she made when she looked at him. Sounds that were not dragon and not human, but were trying to be something in between. They sounded like Dar-is. "That's my name," he said. His voice came out quieter than he expected. She held his gaze and said it again, clearer. He sat down on the chair because his legs felt strange. He looked at this small creature who had come to him broken and cold and crying, who had let him fix her wing and feed her and name her, and who had spent 10 days learning, actually learning, while he thought of her as something he was protecting. She had been watching him the whole time, too. "Sora," he said. She dipped her head. Then she looked at the comm unit, then at him, with an expression he could only describe as waiting, like she had something to tell him and was not yet sure how. He turned up the volume on the broadcast. She settled close to the speaker and listened, and Darius sat beside her in the small, warm room on the edge of an outpost that the galaxy mostly forgot about, and he thought, she is not a stray. She was never a stray. Something happened to her, and someone buried it in 4 lines, and she ended up cold and alone in a corridor where she was not supposed to survive. But she had survived. And now she was learning his name, and he did not fully understand why that felt so important, except that it meant she intended to keep knowing him. She was not waiting to be picked up by someone else. She was here with him, on purpose. Outside the viewport, the stars were the same as always, but the room felt different than it had 10 days ago, smaller and larger at the same time. The ship came in without broadcasting its approach vector. That was the first sign. Every vessel that docked at Varan 7 was required to transmit identification and vector data from the outer approach boundary. It was not a suggestion. It was station law, built into the docking protocols after an incident 7 years ago that nobody in the official record liked to talk about. When the traffic control desk flagged an unannounced vessel on approach, Commander Petra Hale was in the middle of her morning briefing, and she was not happy about the interruption. She was less happy when she saw the vessel's configuration. Imperial court design, not a diplomatic runner, not a courier, a full court presence vessel, the kind that carried senior emissaries and the authority to back up whatever they said. She had the docking arm cleared in 10 minutes and the diplomatic reception bay prepped in 20. She did not know why an Imperial vessel was at her station unannounced. She intended to find out before it became her problem. Ashvin was at the docking arm before Hale arrived. She noticed that. She filed it quietly in the part of her mind that collected things worth remembering. 3 emissaries came aboard. They were tall and formally plated, wearing court insignia that Hale recognized from the briefing materials she had read years ago, and never expected to use. They said their purpose was the investigation of a missing Imperial hatchling. They said they had reason to believe the hatchling had last been traced to this station's docking sector. Ashvin stepped forward before Hale could respond. He told the emissaries that he had personally investigated the incident at the time. He said the hatchling had been lost during a transit complication, an unstable cargo coupling, a decompression event in the docking sleeve. He said he was deeply sorry. He said it with precisely calibrated sadness. Hale watched his hands, perfectly still, too still. Elder Rin entered the reception bay from the far corridor. He had not been invited. He walked in with the unhurried certainty of someone who had been in more formal rooms than everyone else in this one combined, and he stood near the wall, and he waited until Ashvin finished. Then he said, in a clear and steady voice, that the hatchling was alive and present within this station. The temperature in the room changed. One of the emissaries turned slowly toward Rin. Ashvin's head moved a fraction, not much, barely enough to catch, but Hale caught it. Rin said he had observed the hatchling personally, under circumstances he would describe to the court in full, and that he had reason to believe the case had been incorrectly closed. He used the formal diplomatic phrasing for incorrect in a way that meant deliberate. Everyone in the room understood what he meant. Ashvin said Rin was mistaken. He said it calmly. Rin looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not hostile and not warm. Then he turned back to the emissaries and said he was prepared to provide a full account at their request. The senior emissary looked between the two dragons for a moment. Then she said she would require access to all station logs from the past 12 days. Hale was already moving. She pulled her second-in-command aside and gave 2 instructions in a low voice. Lock down the non-essential corridors on levels 3 through 6 under a standard safety review, which was routine and required no special justification. And send a coded message to maintenance worker Darius Cole, crew quarters 4, flagged routine but meaning. Stay where you are. She did not know exactly what was in Darius's quarters. She had not seen the medical bay scan that Darius had saved to his personal file, had not found the camera gap that Ashvin had found, had not put it all together the way Rin had. But she had been running this station for 4 years, and she had learned to feel when something was being protected and when something was being hunted, and right now both were happening in the same room. She sent the message. In crew quarters 4, Darius read it. He was sitting at his desk with Sara beside his elbow, and she had been trying to form a new word all morning. She was working on something that sounded like it had 3 syllables, and she stopped trying when she felt the tension come into his hands. She looked at the comm unit, then at him. He read the message twice. Then he looked at Sara. She was already looking at him. She had been for a while that focused, quiet attention she had been giving him since the beginning. Not asking, just present, like she had been here before and knew what came next even if he did not. He thought about the 4-line report. He thought about Rin's careful question in the corridor. He thought about the fact that an Imperial court vessel had just docked without warning, and the first thing Ashvin had done was get to the bay before anyone told him to go. He thought about Sara, cold in a broken alcove, no one looking, no one coming. He stood up. He picked up his thermal jacket. He wrapped her in it the same way he had the first night, just her head visible, tucked against his chest, and he held her there for a moment. She pressed her chin against his collarbone and said, low and clear, "Dar, is." "I know," he said, "let's go." He walked out of his quarters and toward the diplomatic sector. Nobody had told him to. Nobody had asked him. But he had spent 11 years fixing things that were broken and mishandled and filed away in 4 lines, and he knew what needed doing. The diplomatic chamber had high ceilings and better lighting than the rest of the station. Darius noticed that because the light was the first thing that hit him when he pushed through the door, bright, directional, the kind of formal lighting that made everything look like a record was being kept. Then he noticed the stillness, because every person in the room went still the moment he walked in. 3 emissaries, Ashvin, Rin, Hale standing to the side with her arms behind her back, a handful of diplomatic staff near the far wall. Darius stopped in the center of the room. He reached into the thermal jacket and set Sora down on the chamber table. She stretched, blinked in the light, and then sat straight, very straight, wings folded clean, head up, in a way Darius had not seen her sit before. She looked in that moment nothing like the small, trembling creature he had found in a broken alcove. One of the emissaries made a sound, low, sharp, involuntary. The other 2 dropped to one knee. The senior emissary stayed standing, but her eyes were fixed on Sora's spine with an expression that was not professional. It was something older than professional. Her voice, when she spoke, was careful in the way that people were careful when they were trying not to let feeling come through the words. She asked Darius to explain how this had come to be. Darius explained. He kept it simple. He found her in the lower corridor 12 days ago, hurt and cold, with no one looking for her. He took her to his quarters. He fixed her wing. He kept her fed and warm, that was all. The chamber was quiet while he talked. When he finished, the senior emissary turned to Ashvin. She did not ask him anything. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said one word in formal dragon court language that Darius did not understand. Rin translated it quietly from the side. He said the word meant rescind, as in authority rescinded, as in over. Ashvin said nothing. 2 court security staff that Darius had not noticed standing near the entrance moved forward, and Ashvin went with them without resistance, and the door closed. Rin let out a slow breath. The senior emissary approached the table. She lowered her head towards Sora, and Sora lifted her chin, and the 2 of them held that position for a long moment in a way that looked like language even if it wasn't words. Then the emissary straightened and turned to Darius. She told him, in careful human standard speech, that the creature he had been calling Sora was the last living heir of the Dragon Emperor. She told him the convoy that had been carrying the heir had been attacked 11 days ago. She told him that the attack had not been an accident, and that Ashvin had known the heir had survived, and had buried it because the heir's survival complicated certain interests that Darius did not need to understand right now. She said the heir was alive because a human maintenance worker had sat down on a cold floor and decided not to leave. Darius looked at Sora. Sora was looking at him. He asked, because it was the only thing he actually wanted to know, if she would be safe. The emissary said yes. She said the heir would be returned to the court under full protection. She said the court wished to offer Darius whatever compensation or honor he chose to name. Darius looked at Sora again. She had not looked away from him this time. She was watching his face with those amber eyes, and her spine mark was glowing softly in the formal light, and she looked, even sitting straight, even carrying whatever she carried in that small body, like she was waiting to hear what he said. He said he just wanted to know she would be all right. Sora moved. She crossed the table and stepped onto his arm and climbed to his shoulder, the way she had been doing for days in the small warmth of his quarters, and she put her chin against his jaw and said, clearly, with the 3-syllable word she had been working on all morning, "Safe with you." The room was very quiet. Elder Rin spoke first. He addressed the emissaries in formal dragon, slowly, the way he spoke when he wanted to make sure nothing was misunderstood. He said the heir had made her position plain. He said the traditions of the imperial court recognized the heir's right to name her own warden, and that the naming had just occurred, and that the court was now obligated to honor it. The senior emissary was still for a moment. Then she said that was accurate. She looked at Darius. She told him the title was Warden of the Imperial Flame. She told him it had no human equivalent. She said it meant he was bound to the heir's protection and she was bound to his, and that this was not an assignment or a ceremony. It was a declaration. It was already done. Darius stood in the bright diplomatic chamber in his maintenance uniform with a dragon hatchling on his shoulder, and he thought about a cold corridor and a sound in the dark, and a decision that had not felt like a decision at all. He reached up and put one hand near Sara, and she pressed her head into his palm. Nobody had asked him to save her. He had not known that was what he was doing. He had known only that something small was crying in the dark, and he was not the kind of person who walked away from that. It turned out the galaxy had noticed.